Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here in person, who are attending the recording of this webinar. ISD and StateBook are both committed to adding value and contributing to the awareness and education of the tools and strategies that are most important for economic resilience, community development, and disaster recovery. And for those of you who will be watching this in terms of personal study, we hope that this presentation will help to provide an overview of what the Community Development Block Grant Program for Disaster Recovery is all about, and to share with you a case study of how it is being experienced in real time. And Calandra, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And it's a pleasure to partner with ISD on this webinar series. And I'm Calandra Cruikshank, and I'm founder and CEO of StateBook International, which is a location intelligence company that provides data and analytics to economic development organizations and for planning and strategy and business attraction and development and retention and expansion. And we also work with the other side of the equation, which are the Fortune 500 companies and some smaller businesses as well, that are uh, looking for the ideal locations to invest. And some of the different types of data that we include in our analytics um, are very pertinent to this conversation. And Stephen, you and I were talking earlier about how maybe we'll put together a case study as a follow on to share with this group, showing how the analytics can be used to compare locations after a disaster to illustrate the actual recovery or lack thereof, and the differences that policy and strategy can make in different states for recovery, and the length of time that it takes and the impact that it has on housing is just one example that's pertinent to this discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to you, Stephen, to introduce Stan.
Thank you so much, Calandra. And I should just say that we can rely on StateBook for a lot of our data analytics. And I was so impressed by the power of the program that I asked Calandra to become a fellow of the Institute so that you could help educate us about kind of the data science behind the issues that we care about. So, in terms of housing and kind of the wraparound issues associated with it. Community Development Block Grant Program for Disaster Recovery, commonly known as CDBG-DR, is probably the single most powerful tool that the federal government has in its arsenal. And we're really pleased that we could have Stan Jamont here to explain to us how CDBG-DR is supposed to work, what its intentions are, what's the purpose, and basically to provide an overview for state and local government officials about how it should be used, etc. And the reason we're so pleased, Stan, is that I think you've been at HUD since pretty much the dawn of the CDBG-DR program, and you actually have oversaw its development and how it should work. So we couldn't ask for a better person to help us understand what is this thing that is so vital for disaster recovery, this CDBG-DR.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And let me just introduce myself. My name is Stan Gemont. I'm working with the Institute on a handful of things, but the other side of my days is that I'm a senior advisor for community recovery with Haggerty Consulting. We're an emergency management disaster recovery firm. But prior to joining Haggerty almost 7 years ago, I was with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for 32 years. And almost all of that time was spent working with one aspect or another of the Community Development Block Grant Program. For my final 11 years, I was responsible for all components of the program, either as the office director or as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for grant programs at HUD. And when I say all components of the program, I think that's a good place to start, because it is not just CDBG disaster recovery. It's the annual program that funds over 1,200 jurisdictions around the country at local government level and at the state level, as well as territories. There is a loan guarantee program that goes along with it, known as Section 108. There are other things that have been put in the CDBG bucket over time, including things like the Neighborhood Stabilization Program in response to the housing crisis 2008-2010. So it's a well-used structure, let us say. When we talk about the Community Development Block Grant Program has now been around for over 50 years, originally enacted in 1974. It has grown over time with the number of grantees from about 600 plus or so in 1975 in the first year, up, as they say now, over 1,200 jurisdictions receive money annually. So there is a long track record for this program, and it's a useful conduit to deliver funding to state and local governments for community development purposes, which encompasses things such as housing, infrastructure and public facilities, economic development activities, various real estate activities, such as acquisition and disposition and demolition and clearance, as well as public services. Plus, it provides administrative funding to the grantees to enable them to execute these programs. So this program has been around. It's well known to state and local officials, and they have there is a good structure around it to deliver money. Beginning in the early 1990s, Congress began to look at using the program as a way to deliver disaster recovery funding in response to significant disasters. And this kind of comes out of the response to Hurricane Andrew in 1992. It grows a little bit throughout the 90s, but really begins to take off in the 2000s. Substantial amount of money provided to New York with regard to the response for 9/11 in Lower Manhattan. And then you had a pretty significant uptick in the use of the program beginning in 2005. In response to Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. And over the years since then, been periodic substantial allocations and appropriations to CDBG-DR, to the point that since 2001, it's about $110 billion that has flowed through CDBG-DR. That amount exceeds the amount of money provided to the annual program in that same period. So you can kind of see that it's a very substantial initiative on its own. One of the things to keep in mind here is that this program is not permanently authorized by Congress. It does not exist in law unless Congress opts to fund it and then say, here are what the requirements are going to be for the program on a on that case by case basis. So that is what kind of leads it to being a little bit uneven, in that there is no consistent year-to-year funding for the program. Congress decides what the appropriation is going to be based on what they perceive the unmet need is out there from particular disasters. And then HUD has to, each time that they get one of these appropriations, has to issue the requirements for that particular appropriation via the use of a Federal Register notice. Again, no standing law that goes with it. although it does lean heavily on the basic CDBG program. But because Congress changes the language, administrations change their priorities and initiatives, these notices diverge pretty substantially, over time, one to another. And this is one of the things that creates a little bit of difficulty for jurisdictions in being able to effectively deploy the money quickly. Keeping all that in mind, nonetheless, HUD tries to get these funds on the street as quickly as possible once they are appropriated. The allocation process that HUD uses depends substantially on FEMA data, both from the individual assistance program as well as the public assistance program, particularly with regard to permanent reconstruction under categories C to G. They also access FEMA public assistance data in order to try to develop what I'll call a proxy for infrastructure need, wherein they look at what is necessary as a local or state match to the FEMA programs. So generally it's a 25% match, state and local, to the federal funding, and HUD would fund to that 25% match requirement, not specifically to be used for that purpose, but nonetheless, it's a proxy for unmet need on the infrastructure side. Similarly, HUD uses SBA data on business loans, particularly business loans that are declined, where people apply for that money, and then they get declined. HUD looks at that again as an unmet need. So they piece together what they perceive to be the unmet need on the housing side, on the infrastructure side, and on the economic recovery side in order to develop an allocation for the particular disasters that are covered by that appropriation. So once HUD develops that, issues the notice as to who's going to receive what, they also issue the rules that they're going to accompany that. Now HUD's taken a couple of different approaches to that. What they've done over the last 5 years is kind of use sort of a base notice, initially called the consolidated notice, now being called the universal notice, that kind of sets rules that HUD just is now invoking as allocations and appropriations come through. The idea is that this should expedite the process a little bit as far as developing the plans that are necessary to describe how a grantee is going to use those dollars, and how enables him to more effectively implement the program, so that because there's a more consistent line with regard to what the requirements are. So right now in North Carolina, the state's operating under what's known as the universal notice. It was developed late in the Biden administration, issued right before Biden left office. When President Trump took office, that was put on hold for a brief period. They reworked it, took some pieces out of it, but did put it back out within about 60 days. And that version of that rule, issued late March of 2025, that is what North Carolina is working with, as well as the 46 other grantees that got funding out of the appropriation that also funded North Carolina. So a lot of information there, a lot of moving parts, but the one thing to understand is North Carolina actually got money relatively quickly with respect to Hurricane Helene, knowing that the event took place at the end of September 2024. Allocation was made in January 2025. State developed this plan in the first quarter of 2025, submitted it to HUD in April of 2025, and received approval within, I think, 4 to 6 weeks thereafter. So they got their grant agreement mid 2025, and have been working ever since to implement the various programs that were identified in the action plan that was approved by HUD. Consistent with past experience, the state focused much of its money on housing recovery. Over $1 billion was being directed toward single family um, uh, single family recovery, including the allocation that came to them for mitigation in order to help try and address the private road and bridge issues in accessing particular properties. So when you look at the overall amount that the state received, 1.4 billion, over 1 billion dedicated to housing efforts. The other pots of the funding included infrastructure program. There's a multifamily program, and there is the community um, revitalization program. So, number of different initiatives that were put into the state's plan. They chose consciously not to break that money up into too many programs because, again, there's an administrative burden that goes with multiple programs. They tried to keep those, the number of programs kind of tight, if you will, so that they were able to put an adequate amount of money into any one of the programs and to be able to administratively cover those programs. So as I say, the Federal Register notice, this universal notice, sets forth the basic requirements that the state must work with. The state, consistent with requirements of the notice, have to develop a series of policies and procedures to implement each one of the programs. There's also a set of overarching policy procedures that they need to have due to certain certifications that are required by the appropriations language, things that they will have policies and with regard to procurement, with regard to timely expenditure of funds, with regard to financial management, with regard to the administration of their website, that how they will go about implementing duplication of benefit reviews, things of that nature. So all those things are to be on the website as well, with pursuant to HUD's requirements. But so there should be a wealth of information out there about exactly what the state is doing and with the money and how they're implementing the programs. So that's a good source of information to start with and trying to understand exactly how the state is proceeding and progressing with regard to implementation of the overall grant. There are quarterly reports that are required of the state to be presented to HUD, and again, those reports ultimately make their way onto the website and are available for public viewing. As I say, it's a quarterly report. It's due 30 days after the end of the quarter, and that's the point at which the state needs to get those reports online. So again, you can kind of track performance and progress over time by looking at those performance reports, and they may be supplementing. The state may be supplementing those quarterly reports with other dashboard information available on the state CDBG-DR website. I will say sometimes I type in CDBG-DR for North Carolina, and I still get things that come up from NCORE, the Office of Recovery and Resilience, even though that office is not managing the $1.4 billion that came to them came to the state with respect to Hurricane Helene. That money is now being administered within the Department of Commerce with a different organization in that department as opposed to NCORE. Stephen, having provided that overview, are there particular points you'd like me to drill down into?
Yes. Stan, there are two user experiences that I hope you can provide some guidance and insight for. One is for the state user, what are the best effective practices for working with CDBG-DR? If there were, three to five things that you think state um, applicants or counterparties to the federal government should do, what recommendations would you have for state users? And then similarly, for local communities that want to access CDBG-DR, are there kind of a set number of effective practices that they should take into account when they are making applications, et cetera?
With regard to states, HUD has tried over the years to direct, you know, folks to do certain things on the front end, um, by invoking things like an implementation plan and staffing plans. Because they're early on with the program, there were a number of instances where states kind of shorted the administration of the money, if you would. And if we think about the state of North Carolina as an example, the state, I think, gets like $35 million a year from HUD for the annual CDBG allocation for its non-entitlement program. And that's what serves rural communities, smaller rural communities, um, under the basic CDBG program. So when you get an allocation of 1.4 billion vis-a-vis an annual program that you're built to administer, and at a level of $35 million, that's a pretty significant jump. I mean, it's not just tenfold; it's a lot more than that. I mean, you're really at about 40-fold increase, I think, if my math is good. It's a different animal. You have to staff up and be willing to um, look at this in a different way than just as an extension of your basic CDBG program. So HUD has tried to get people to focus on this, and Congress, to a degree, has done that as well. Again, with the certifications that they require on the front end, with regard to the proficiency of financial management practices, with the procurement practices, duplication of benefit reviews, all the things that um, uh, can be stumbling blocks to implementation. That if you don't take care of the fundamentals, you don't have a chance of having an effective program. So you you see this significant emphasis on having the infrastructure to run the program. In some cases, because they don't have it, or they don't have it because they've not had CDBG-DR before, or because they are an infrequent grantee under the program. They may not have those standing uh, structures in place, and sometimes it can take a long time to effectively get them in place. Um, so North Carolina is kind of in between here. They last received money with respect to Lawrence and Matthew. Those were, 8 to, you know, we look at 2025 as sort of the touch point, 7, 9 years in the past. And while NCORE was out there and implementing programs consistent or, in response to those events, NCORE had a bit of a checkered history with the state itself, the state legislature, and the you know the desire with regard to the Helene recovery was to kind of clean the slate a bit and start with some new approaches. And so that's why you see the funding being administered out of the Commerce Department this time around. But coming back to the idea of what those recommendations are, for states to effectively manage this money, there tends not to be a lot new here. There are a lot of examples out there with regard to how other folks have done things. And again, some of this is a matter of execution. There's um, and program design. So you can kind of look at what other states have done, um, adopt what's good, change what hasn't worked. But again, it's sort of an iterative process for folks to develop and implement programs um, that can be responsive to what the needs are. So on a related point, HUD always expects these programs to kind of change over time because there's an amendment process to the action plan. People can change these programs if something isn't working. There's an opportunity to address what may not be working, and via an amendment process. So these things can be done. HUD anticipates it. If we look back at Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, they amended the basic action plan more than 75 times over the history of that grant. Um, it's been open a long time. I don't know they've actually fully closed out that grant, but again, it just shows that there's going to be change in these programs over time because you have not anticipated all needs right off of the bat. So this flexibility issue is also key. That don't just necessarily think you nail it on the first pass. You're going to have to be thinking about how you update it in order to effectively address what the remaining unmet needs are or unmet needs that emerge over time.
Terrific. And
So,
for local communities working with the states, is there some guidance you would provide there?
um, there is a lot of self-education that needs to go on here. Understand what it is that can be done with the money, and propose activities and projects that fit within those requirements. Um, it, it's it seems a little simple to say that, but there are sometimes folks come, there's an idea of what the recovery should look like. Um, and while CDBG is a pretty flexible and bendable source of money in order to get to these things, and oftentimes there's a way to do something, may not always be the straightest path through to getting where you want to be. So you need to think about exactly, given the what is permitted under the program. It may not be 100% matched to what you want to do, but there's a way to do at least some of what you wish to do. There are, the other thing here is always keeping in mind that needs to be a national objective achieved by the activity that you're funding. And so that needs to go into that thinking. Two fundamental questions to always be asked is what I want to do eligible under the program, and two, will it meet a national objective? And in this disaster recovery situation, also a third question, which is how do I tie this back to the damage that occurred as a result of the disaster? There is a little slice of mitigation money here that HUD has made available, and the linkage back to damage of the disaster is much softer where that mitigation money is concerned, but that is only a 15% add-on to the basic unmet needs that HUD has determined for that particular disaster. So there's not all that much mitigation money. There's some, but not much. And so there's a real emphasis here to make sure that you're hitting on eligibility, national objective, and tie back to the disaster and when you're thinking about what you're doing. The other thing to keep in mind is um, there is language within the appropriation that says you can't use the CDBG-DR funding for something, for some activity or some cost that either FEMA or the Army Corps will make money available for. So you can't get in there use CDBG-DR funding to get in front of FEMA or in front of the Army Corps if they will eventually get to it.
Hmm. So there's a fair amount of a coordination problem. And the other thing is that each CDBG-DR legislation is different by definition too, right?
They,
And
they, they,
it's
they've been, again, they've been iterative over time, and you see the same requirements showing up time and time, but it kind of metastasizes, if you will. What my example I always use for folks is if I go back and look at the Katrina appropriation language in 2005, it was like 500 to 600 words. The, the one that kind of holds sway right now, which dates back to about 2022, um, clocks in at over 2,000 words. So over time, Congress adds things to this. And that kind of, as I say, it metastasizes, creates additional requirements. And that then means HUD has to implement those requirements. So things kind of grow over time. It's just the nature of the beast there.
perfect. So in the interests of time, we're going to hold questions to the end. This is going to go for 75 minutes, so we'll have at least 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. But Stan, just to sum up, thank you very much for this. And if I can play this back a little bit, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good if you're a state filing, because you can do the amendment process.
Mhm.
Second, you need to develop some kind of a pre-plan for surge capacity, given the difference between normal CDBG administration and CDBG-DR administration. Um, then the next thing is that you have to actually read the actual legislation, since it tends to metastasize, as you put it. And then the last thing is that not only do you have to have a a plan for how you're going to do it, you have to really, I think, before a disaster even hits, think through the structure of how you're going to actually administer it, and then have
Yeah,
a lot of communication with your local communities. But then on the local community side, there's a fundamental challenge from the beginning, which would be the clarity between what FEMA and the Army Corps are going to do versus what CDBG-DR can do. And then secondly, to be sure again that any proposals that roll up that are asked to the CDBG-DR program uh, take into account that national interest thing. So if it's solely within a state, it might not necessarily qualify.
yeah.
Um, Fantastic. I want to turn to LC. Did I miss anything fundamental?
Let me just add one other thing that once you get the implementation on the state side, it, it's it's a much higher level of touch and involvement than it is in the regular program, because the regular program you make a grant to a local government within the state, and they go and execute the project. Under CBGDR, the state is directly implementing many things. Okay, so you the state doesn't have um, states cannot administer a housing rehab program in the regular program. Under DR, they can do that, and there's always a learning curve here. And so it's a higher level of touch, greater degree of management oversight required.
Okay. Very, very important. Stan, thank you very much. Now, what we want to do is we want to pivot to a case study of how it is actually being experienced on the ground. And this is relevant for Georgia, it's relevant for Connecticut, it's relevant for the rest of the country. And one of the things that I think, LC, is important for other communities that may experience issues like this in the future, for people who are going through it at some future time, is um, talking about how this experience with Swananoa, how people from with other communities might be able to take things out of it as well. But Elsie Clemens is literally a force of nature. She has been a fellow of ISD since our modern refounding, since 2018. And she, in a lot of ways, has spearheaded ISD's commitment and concern about the hollowing out of small towns and rural communities, and um, and the fact that we need to actually create more capacity for the places that have the least capacity initially to do things. And there needs to be some fundamental change, which she single-handedly right now is trying to do one community at a time. So, Elsie, thank you very much for joining us, and we would love to hear this case study of how CDBG-DR is being experienced right now.
Thanks so much. I apologize if you hear some noise in the background. I'm doing some traveling, so wherever I can get a Wi-Fi signal. Just let me know if there's any difficulties in hearing what I'm saying. My background is sort of, but the reason that I do what I do the way that I do it is, and I focus on small and rural communities with populations under 10,000, especially in rural unincorporated areas, is because that's the kind of place where I grew up in rural Alabama. And I lived through 64 tornadoes in 2.5 hours in Alabama in 2011. April 27th was the day that changed my life forever. And when you have the unfortunate entry into the club of living through a major federal disaster declaration, especially one that has a really high loss of life, you wear that scar with you the rest of your life. It changes all of us. Um, and you're a regular person one day, and then the next day you're a first responder. You're pulling people out of a river. You're digging someone out from underneath a pile of rubble. You're doing things that you never could have imagined. And I still get very emotional talking about it. Even though my disaster was 14 years ago, what I learned in going to donate my time up with Helena in North Carolina is that the devastation and loss of life was so similar to what had happened in Alabama that it really triggered a lot of my PTSD. And so I didn't realize that I still had so much unprocessed grief and trauma related to it. So when I got into this, it was because I experienced a disaster, and I was a regular person doing for my community what we do after a disaster, which is volunteering and helping in any way that I could, knowing that I didn't know anything about disasters, right? But you have to become an expert in everything when you're on the ground. When it's happening to you, it's happening to your friends, your family members, et cetera. So you have to learn about construction. You have to learn about federal policy regulations. You have to understand what all of these different terms mean. And it's extremely overwhelming because you're trying to do it in the midst of a lot of trauma and dealing with the reality of living through this situation. And it's not just like that for regular people. It's like that for the local municipal governments, the private nonprofits, the housing associations, the housing authorities, and other housing nonprofits. Everyone is living through this oftentimes for the first time ever. And it is, I think that there's so often, a lot of criticisms that is put on the local government or the state government and saying, why aren't you doing it this way? And how do you not know these things? And if you are fortunate, like North Carolina, to not have had many disasters, you are in a really good position because you don't have a lot of disasters, but you're in a very poor position when it comes to experience of what Stan just mentioned. So I have worked for FEMA, and I specialized in FEMA public assistance, which is municipal governments and private nonprofits. I worked Hurricane Sandy up in New York City and was assigned to all of the organizations that were had special collections because I actually have an art background. I used to be an art teacher long ago before disasters took over my life. And so what I went on a journey of was trying to learn all of the federal policy so that I could advocate for the people, like the communities that did not get the assistance that we needed in Alabama. You can go through many of the communities. We had every single county in the state of Alabama was a federally declared disaster zone, every single county. And I think that the magnitude of some of these big disasters really, you can't really understand it unless you're living inside of what that means. But when it's every single county, there's not a lot of capacity for anybody else within the county to come help anybody else as far as one jurisdiction to another. So I started learning this policy information because I had seen what it looks like when there is not sufficient assistance, money. Because at the end of the day, what this boils down to is money and regular people's ability to get access to the money. And Stan is so brilliant, and he's been doing this for over 3 decades. He has such a sophisticated knowledge and a sophisticated language and lexicon that most regular people do not have. And again, it doesn't matter if you work for the county or for a rural city, etc. It doesn't matter if you're the fire department or the police chief. You are not blessed with some magical knowledge the day that a disaster hits, that you wake up knowing what all of these things mean. And again, that goes to the state level as well. So I want to couch all of that in saying that everything that I say here is not said with a criticism or a critical eye towards in the negative for the state of North Carolina. What I am going to be talking about is really shining a light on the way in which, how Stan said, you need to recognize that there is a lot that you can do, and there are changes that you need to be able to be agile and nimble and flexible, because you are learning as you go, and no 2 disasters are the same. And just because one program worked for your last disaster doesn't mean that it's going to work for this disaster. What makes Helene so unique is the place that it hit. It is the epitome of rural. The only place that gets attention on the media just about is Asheville. Asheville is fine. Other than all of the artists that were devastated, the River Arts District was very finite of a location that was impacted. Yes, we were all without power. We were without water for over 2 months, water and sewer. But places outside of Asheville, there are many, 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 many of them. You will never see them on the news. The news cameras never go there. And Appalachia adds an additional layer of complexity, which is the topography, because it is your devastation is tucked away in the cracks and the crevices of the Appalachian Mountains. It's hidden underneath the tree canopies. So there were over, at this point, our count is 5,000 landslides, and it's way over that if you look at the number of small landslides. So when I got to Swannanoa in October 10th, 2024, I was intending on only staying for 3 weeks. But the devastation that I saw in Swannanoa and across Western North Carolina was so far beyond anything that I had ever witnessed in my life, my own disaster included, that I knew that it was critical for me to stay and try and get a mobilization of information, and I act as a translator of teaching the regular people how to speak the language of money so that they can get access to the money that they need to recover. So I have ended up connecting with and working closely with a number of business owners. And I want to get into the taking this. My brain doesn't do well in the ethereal, right? Like all of these big words and these big concepts. What does it mean? What are we building? What do we want to build? And I think that in the world of CDBG-DR, we meaning the collective of anyone that gets a direct allocation, or the state who is left to manage this. If you will start with the product that you want, what do you want to build? What is it that you physically, tangibly want to happen? And if you start there and work backwards as to how the program needs to be structured in order for you to get the product that you want, that is not how this is usually done. Usually you have a state action plan that's very big and broad brush of all these big lofty goals. And then you have your actual programmatic language of, we're going to roll out this bucket of money in this way. Let's take multifamily money. We're going to roll out multifamily money. Multifamily. In my world, another thing that I became an expert in is small incremental infill development, especially mixed use, because in rural communities, that's what we have. We have very small parcels. We have very small properties. We have not sophisticated big landowners and big developers. We have regular people that are the people that are invested in their communities. They are the ones that build the housing. They are the ones that own the rentals. It's usually, 1, 2, or 3 units under a roof. So in Swannanoa, when I got there, they are no different. What is needed in Appalachia is very small, meaning if we look at the national standard of what small multifamily is, there is a term called missing middle housing. It already has a definition. We don't need to come up with a new one. It is between 2 and 19 units. The people that own 2 to 19 units are fundamentally different people than own a 150 unit apartment building. That is a completely different looking animal, right? My cousin owns 3 units. My uncle owns 6 units. Those are within the regular people's realm of managing things. When you get up to that 19 units is really, really the top edge. It's really comfortable, hits around that 15 unit mark. Once you get above 15, it starts getting more challenging for a regular person that doesn't have experience literally doing this as a full-time job. So that being said, what you end up with in these programs is language that is standard language that is used across the state as a blanket everywhere. And because the big cities, and I consider Asheville a big city, that's the joke. Everybody's like, so it's all relative, right? So Asheville's a huge metropolitan area compared to the places where I work. Some of the places where I work have no full-time staff at the municipal government. Many of the places that I work, most of them maybe have a dozen people that work within City Hall. So again, that is a fundamentally different looking place than the city of New Orleans or even the city of Asheville. And a lot of these bigger cities that we think about when we think about CDBG-DR money. So CDBG-DR money has not the programs, and this is across FEMA as well. None of these programs have been developed with a language and an accessibility for regular rural people so that they can understand how the rules are, they can understand how the money works, and they can understand how to get the end product that they want, which is the recovery of the local housing, single family, multifamily, and businesses. And businesses are left out of every single bit of recovery funding except CDBG-DR. It is the only federal money that is flexible enough that it will allow private property owners, whether it is a private property owner that wants to build 10 units of housing on their property, or it is a private commercial property owner that owned a laundromat and wants to build back with something with 7 units above and 3 units of commercial below. Those are the regular people that are going to have to, if we want a good recovery, those are the people that have to be able to get access to the money. So in Swannanoa specifically, the largest property that we have in proximity to where the downtown is, what is one of the nation's oldest master plan communities. Swannanoa has two of the nation's oldest master plan communities. So it is sitting on the best of the built environment as far as the way that the roads are laid out and the way that the buildings were laid out. Just because it experienced economic decline through the 70s and 80s, a lot of those structures got knocked down. Helene did a really good job of taking the rest of it. So Helene has removed along the main commercial corridor, Helene removed 30% of their commercial district. And because Helene's impacts in Swannanoa were both landslides, it had one of the largest landslides to hit a neighborhood in U.S. history. And it was riverine flooding because the river shot up 35 feet in just 2.5 hours. So there was a tremendous amount of devastation with a community that is sandwiched between mountains on each side and a river in the middle. So you have destruction down both sides of the river, and you have destruction coming down one side of the mountains with the landslides. So when we look at what the goal of the state was, the state did a great job of getting people involved and getting them to the meetings of the state action plan to give feedback. And what people said over and over and over again is, we need small multifamily. We need small mixed use. We are rural. This is what we need. And so what happened is the state action plan fully reflected that desire. And I brought up at the very first meeting with the state, I gave feedback and said, hey, we're going to need mixed use here. I don't see in any of the draft language this mixed use. We're going to need to be able to blend your desired economic recovery for your commercial corridors. We're going to need to be able to blend that money with the residential multifamily so that we can marry those two things, track them separately, but we can marry those two things to create a mixed use building. Because the other thing that rural people do not have is they're not usually sitting on a huge stack of cash. Also, the banks are not super excited about lending to people that are not sitting on a stack of cash. So they weren't sitting on a stack of cash before the disaster. Now they've lost their business. They have lost everything except the debt that they still hold. Most of the property owners that I am working with still hold between $250,000 and $500,000 worth of debt on a building that doesn't exist anymore. There is no money coming to assist them. There is no magic wand. Less than 2% of the properties impacted by Helene were in the floodplain. There is no insurance. And I want to let that sit. There is no insurance. So when you have a something like Carpet City, which had a tremendous amount of equipment that is leased, it has a lot of samples that are there that are not owned by them, but they are out as product. That is not, there is no insurance to pay back all of those vendors. That is out of your own pocket. So now Don and Linda, who are in their 70s and were planning on selling Carpet City in 2025 for about $2 million, they were going to sell a lifelong successful business. They put their entire lives into it. They raised children. They raised grandchildren in Carpet City. They raised many community members through that building. They were just within a year and a half of retirement. So what happens to Don and Linda? They have no insurance to cover anything. Their building is completely gone, not in the floodplain at all. And they're left with nothing. So they're too old. They don't want to take on the idea of rebuilding. So they have a neighbor that said, look, if you don't fill up to it, I'll take it on for you. And she's the woman that owned the laundromat that I mentioned. So there are a lot of regular people in Swannanoa that have that grit of do it ourselves. No one's coming to save us. We're rural, we're unincorporated, we're used to doing everything for ourselves anyway. That's why we live in unincorporated areas. We don't want the government up in our business. We like that freedom that we have. But what happens is when the state, with its very extremely well-intentioned state action plan, they developed the programs that are going to roll that money out. They developed 2 programs. They did use the word small multifamily and regular multifamily. But what happened is the definition of what it means to be small. And I think that was, nobody ever said in these communities, when the state defined what they did, family renter occupied amount of single family housing. Again, rural. We're not sitting on big apartment buildings out there, right? If we have rentals, it's regular single family houses that are the rentals in our communities. It's not really a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex. But in the state of North Carolina, they passed legislation just a few years ago that 4 units are qualified underneath single family, that definition of single family. So you can have up to 4 units under roof. Now, the reality of North Carolina is it is actually just 1 unit under that roof. So what they did is they made the definition of small multifamily between 1 and 4 units. And they did that very altruistically because it drove more money to that single family renter occupied market. And by restricting it to 4 units, those owners of those properties, which is mainly intended to be repair and reconstruction, not new construction, those owners do not have to deal with a lot of the Davis-Bacon and a lot of the compliance, the things that you need people like me that know how to do, because regular people, most of them would have no idea how to do a lot of the federal compliance stuff. So then that set aside, they have a set aside of $57.4 million in small rental. That's 30% of all of the rental money was in the small bucket. That was great because I've been working with my people to develop small. Now, small in my mind, again, is under 15 units. So everything that we developed was 7 units on 1 floor, and that it could be pushed up to a second story to double that and get 14 units. I worked with architects from across the United States. We've been working on these plans for the last 15 months. We got amazing site plans and designs and floor plans and elevations, which we're really proud of. They are beautiful, historic-looking buildings that fit beautifully within the context of the rural community. They're of the appropriate scale. The biggest property that we have is Carpet City. It's less than a half an acre. We cannot put that many units on less than a half an acre. So that being said, what we're left with is the 30% for the small multifamily. That was non-competitive. So first come, first serve. So I thought, great, we're going to be first come, first serve. We don't have to compete for this. We're going to be ready to walk in the door with our applications. That program was supposed to come out in September. It was delayed and it did not come out until mid-December. When it came out, they had reduced that number to 4 units, and it was predominantly not for new construction. It was for people who, whatever it was that you had that was there, they're going to be fixing that. So they said, just wait, just wait. There's going to be another program coming 5 or 6 months from now, and it's going to be the bigger multifamily program. And it's going to be the economic recovery for the businesses. The thing is, you can't wait in perpetuity because your land will be foreclosed on. And so where we are right now is the larger multifamily program that we were told to wait for has still not officially been launched 6 months later. And even when it is launched, the draft language already contains a myriad of very, very normal language that precludes regular people from competing. Like, for example, you must have previous experience managing federal money. Well, that's everybody is out. All the local landowners are out. Again, that is a good intention rule to have because you want people that know how to manage this money. Another rule is that they are going to prioritize developments that need the least amount of CDBG-DR money. That's a great thing. You need less of the disaster money, then it can go further. Well, again, my people are out. They need more of the money because they are the ones that are the most economically impacted in this. So all of the well-intentioned rules, and there are only about a dozen of them, what they all combine together to do is inadvertently, accidentally, through no intentionality, they prioritize and shove that money over to big box developers that build between 100 and 150 units because you get some really excellent cost savings. So when you're looking at the state at an applicant and deciding who you want to fund, one of the things that they also prioritize is that you have a lower cost per square foot. Well, if I've got 150 units, my cost per square foot or my cost per unit is much lower than if I have 7 units. 7 units, your architectural, your engineering costs, all of those things are going to have a baked in standard cost, no matter how big or small your site is. And so we have a really over bloated cost per unit value, which on paper makes us look like we're not a good competitive product. So now I just wanted to throw all of that out there. It's a lot. There's a lot of specifics. I see Stephen waving his finger. I just want to bring to the table and reiterate that where we were in North Carolina, the state has not yet released these programs. It is not too late to fix it. But the state, even though we have been sharing this information about the modifications that are necessary since December, and we have had our senator and our state house rep, and we have numerous people that have sat down with the state and passed this information along. The state has not made the changes that are necessary to make it accessible to the regular people, the intended recipients on the ground. And again, it is not nefarious and it is not malicious. It is because this is the program as it has always been known, and this is the way that it always is. And they are not small developers. They don't know all of these things about how things have to cash flow. And it's just literally a lack of having the knowledge of being a small developer, being from a rural community and understanding what that piece is and how that matches with the very top layers of policy language that accidentally harm us at the bottom.
So, Elsie, thank you very much for laying that out. Let me see if I can play this back to just to validate it. So, HUD, about 3, 4 months after the disaster, gets the CDBG-DR appropriation. The state comes in and they pull together a master plan pretty swiftly after that. The language, though, um, some of the language is in there, but some of the criteria and the conditions cause it so that it doesn't matter that the language is in there because it ends up de facto putting people outside of the program. Then also the way that it's structured, if you just set it up for 4 units or less, and then anything else above, that the program as designed structurally benefits urban areas and doesn't help rural communities and small towns as
It's
well as it should. That's the experience, right?
Well, and I would even say the preface for it's imagined to benefit urban areas. But again, urban areas have a lot of tiny lots where we need infill at smaller scale. The reason missing middle housing is missing is because we don't have it. So it actually disadvantages both the urbanized and city of Asheville is just disadvantaged with a program that's set up traditionally as the rural areas are because they also need small infill.
So then, what is happening now is that this actually ends up playing into the hollowing out of small towns and rural communities. And for the this past decade, I think was the first time in recent history, Calandra, if I'm not wrong, that there was actually a rural outmigration as opposed to, the population in defined rural areas actually decline. Now, in the business world, it's been federal policy to create the Small Business Administration because the material conditions for small businesses are so different from corporates, et cetera. But within kind of the housing area, there isn't what you're calling the missing middle. There isn't kind of an intentionality um, for making sure that kind of your small towns, rural communities are um, seen as a value or seen as a distinct value. Like the difference between small businesses and corporates. There's no there's no kind of definition of understanding that the conditions are different. So then what this would mean is that either the state, the council of governments, or the planning districts need to create some kind of program in advance, I'm assuming. This shouldn't be set up after the disaster, but that there should be something preset to help build the capacity and support the small towns and rural communities. That would be an effective practice.
I think that what it is, and again, I'm going to stay on North Carolina because I have to get it fixed. Swannanoa's survival and rural Western North Carolina's survival is 100% contingent on whether or not we get this language right, and it has got to be repaired, and it is not big changes. We are talking about microscopic precision surgical changes in a few words. I mean, like 12 words that we're talking about here that would make all the difference. So I would say a couple of things about your statement. It's not that there is less of a value on paper. The desire to want to support rural and local is there. It's that there is a lack of understanding, like you said, about what that means in application. And again, it's not that we don't need technical support. We need the words to allow us to blend money in ways that big guys don't need. We need to have the way in which you use a point valuation system to show who's competitive and who isn't. You have to recognize we cannot compete with a 150 unit professional developer. Nothing on paper from us looks good, but yet we are the lifeblood, again, not even of just the rural communities, especially the rural. It's all we have. But even in the urbanized areas, there is a fundamental lack of, again, and this is national.
Just the conditions,
This
you
is
have
every program in every state.
you have the purpose, but you got to make sure that the criteria align with the intent of what you want to do. I want to bring Stan back into the conversation, in the sense of Stan, within CDBG-DR, is there is there some kind of structural intent to support what Elsie's calling the missing middle, the kind of these smaller developments? It's just that rural communities are never going to have the density.
Yeah.
And so if you want to make sure that it helps at the state level, statewide level of community development, does aren't we talking like I was saying, small businesses are different than corporates? Is there some kind of intent within CDBG-DR to support at the state level the broad development?
So I would say that the pendulum has swung over time. That as depending on the administration and leadership at HUD and what their priorities might be, there can be different points of emphasis, within these Federal Register notices that govern the money. And sometimes it is less prescriptive, let us say, and might have less of an emphasis on exactly how you do things. And at other times, the pendulum goes in another direction, saying, okay, we want to leverage this for all the possible housing we can get out of it. And depending on where you are in that in that pendulum swing, you can get different outcomes. I wouldn't say that there's a continual through line one way or the other, but you do get different points of emphasis at different points in time, depending on the administration.
So let me ask Stan this question. Stan, in all of your numerous years you've had eyes on a lot of projects. I mean, thousands and thousands of projects have filtered through your office. And so my question is, statistically, how often are you seeing between 2 and 19 units? Let's say between because 7 is sort of, let's say 8 to 19 units, that little sliver, and mixed use blended together. Let's just take 8 to 19 first, and then the second question is any scale of small with mixed use blended together. So
let me back off of that for a second. Say the mixed use has always been a bit of a difficult concept in CDBG world, basically because when you talk about mixed use, you got two different things going on there. One, you got housing, and 2, you got probably an economic development activity going on. And they don't always mesh well not from an eligibility standpoint so much, but how do you achieve a national objective? Because when you have housing, it tends to be who's living in the housing, okay? Particularly for a smaller project or for single family. When you get the larger multifamily, it's just, a majority of the units. So if you're trying to make a project meet national objective for housing, that's one thing. And then when you have the commercial component, that's going to more often than not be predicated on jobs you create or retain. And so you're trying to get projects that fit both criteria. It's not always simple, and hence HUD hasn't said a lot about it over the years. So there's sort of that fundamental difference there between, I'm not going to call it conflict, but they don't mesh real well sometimes. Be that as it may, there are probably more opportunities in CDBG-DR to get a waiver and some kind of different requirement or alternative requirement to make these kind of projects simpler. But it involves taking a good concept to HUD and saying, this is what we want to do. This is how it's going to be a national objective. Waive this and give us this particular requirement to make these things work. So that's how you would go about doing this. As far as small rental projects, I mean, some states have set up, some grantees have set up programs specifically for small rental, but they've tended to be more focused on units of 7 or fewer units.
Right, exactly.
The reason being,
Davis Bacon
does not kick in on those projects.
Exactly. Well-intentioned, but harmful.
So again, it doesn't fit a lot of neat categories. There are a couple of problems to be overcome, and you may not find a lot of projects or programs that are on point as when you want to go to like 19 or 20 units as your maximum, because there's this other thing out there that says 7 or fewer is really what gives you the greatest benefit.
But there's no data that says 7 or fewer. Again, that's a Davis Bacon thing, and I get that it's a lighter obligation on the recipient to have to do that compliance. Totally acknowledged. However, we cannot single family our way out of this disaster. Everywhere was already in a housing crisis. Western North Carolina has one of the worst housing crises in the United States, it has one of the most unhealthy housing markets in all of America because it has less than 1% of availability in every single income demographic. Even the highest, wealthiest people have less than 1% availability in rental units. And that,
You just put yourself on mute, Elsie.
again, I know all the reasons. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that there are reasons that it doesn't happen, but what I am saying is that we can no longer have the attitude of this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we're always going to keep doing it. We have across the nation, we are under a housing crisis. We already were. Everybody uses the words missing the middle across all of their comprehensive plans. It's all over the place in Western North Carolina. And yet we are not creating the programs that are specifically set up to be able to get the people to the table who build those, who are the local landowners. And we can accomplish the national objectives. What we need is the language to be appropriate. So if somebody as good at policy as me can't get these projects through the door and get them funded, there is no hope for any other rural community that doesn't have a policy expert at the table with them.
So Elsie, I'm a little bit cognizant of the time. Based on your experience, for those who are planning or preparing or who are having to submit future CDBG-DR applications and everything, what are three pieces of advice that you would give? And then kind of a follow-up is, would you give them to the state or would you give them to the COG or would you give it to the individual community?
Could you repeat I heard three and then
Three,
the
three,
third.
three pieces of advice.
For the three pieces of advice for the state, any state that's
Yeah,
thinking about this?
any state, because
Yeah, sure.
this is going
Yeah.
to go to a lot of states.
Yeah, so every state has programs that are exactly like North Carolina's. They are not unique. It is the standard language. So what every state and every direct allocation city needs to do, and HUD, the current guy that has Stan's job over at HUD, he is very excited about creating a program that delivers this product at the end of it because it has to be fundamentally structured differently. Again, just with a little bit of language tweaking, it's doable. So my advice would be start with the product you want. If you know that you need housing and you know that the bulk of your land is not many, many, many big acres, right? Some places have that. But CDBG-DR is treated as a one-size-fit-all program in every disaster, everywhere, all the time. And so I would say look at how modifications can be made, but you're going to have to draw in small developers so that you understand how the financials work completely differently. The things that you would prioritize in a 100-unit building are not going to work. You can't have 100% income restricted because you need that 49% market rate to cash flow you on a monthly basis because you've only got 9 units. And so number one, I would say look at the end product that you want. Number two is if you put surveys out there, don't be scared when people are saying there's a problem. Don't hide from the problem. It's an opportunity. North Carolina could be the first in the nation to issue a program that does this, which they would be lauded for the rest of history. Because again, no state has ever solved this problem because no state usually has an incremental small developer sitting at the table when they are developing these programs. And that would be my final piece is get your small developers to the table when you are building out programs because they're gonna be like, oh, by the way, that wouldn't work financially. By the way, we can't cash flow that. By the way, there is no way we could get lending on that because you still have to get a loan, even if you've got 100% grant funding in order to cash flow for the cost of construction. So there are just a number of things that are fundamentally different. If you want the people of your community that own the land to be the ones they desire, they're willing to do the work. They just they don't even need help. They just need it not to be a hindrance. First, do no harm.
Right. Well, Elsie, thank you so much. And Stan, thank you very much for this overview. I think that this was very illuminating on both sides. If people want to get in touch with you, have follow-up questions, etc., what's the best way to do that? And I'll start with Stan and then you, Elsie.
Via email, for the most part. It's simply stan.gimont@haggertyconsulting.com. Should I just put that in the chat?
Sure. Well, thank you, Stan. And Elsie, for you, what's the best way?
LC@forceofnature.biz. And I put mine in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Calandra, one of the things about this that is really concerning is the timeline. When you think about the fact that Helene happened in September of 2024, and we're now 21 months after and still waiting on guidance, etc. It makes me think that, or wonder if there is an equivalent to missing persons problem. You know how they say that if you don't find someone after 48 hours or 72 hours, the likelihood of their coming back diminishes significantly? It seems to me that with the length of time scales that we're talking about, especially for lower income folks, that there might be kind of a drop off of people coming back to their communities. Kind of the diaspora ends up getting kind of solidified. And my thought is if that happens, if the former residents end up saying, you know what, I can't come back, that it actually will take a lot longer for that rural community or small town to rebuild to the way that it used to be. It seems to me that retention of your residents would be a big deal. Is there some way that StateBook could help identify whether or not this is a true story?
Yeah, there is. We have data going back in time. And there's also when the wildfires hit California, we saw a lot of need, as you recall, for there was always this catch-22. Do we focus on housing first so people can go back to their homes, or do we get businesses in there? But if people have nowhere to live, how do they run their business and who's going to come to the business? And so, from a business perspective, from a small business perspective, especially, we've seen that unfold time and again, right? That catch 22. And I'm sure you're right. There's a similar um, type of uh, trend with especially low income residents. But yeah, we have the data and we can track and benchmark that, and we can track and benchmark where the investment goes and the actual impact that is delivered from that investment. And I see Elsie has put in the chat also anti-displacement policies that can help with this ahead of, especially if implemented ahead of time, right? And then, yeah, the mixed use, allowing that on the back end or putting that in your policy ahead of time. And, like LC, I live in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. I was hit with Hurricane Irene and followed by Tropical Storm Sandy. And we had some very similar kinds of issues as Western North Carolina. And today, many of those, that was so long ago now, but today, several of those communities are still blighted from that. And recently took all of these matters into their own hands and decided to stop waiting for federal or state policies and funding to make an impact, and are redoing comprehensive plans that haven't had funding or will since 2005. And the whole community is coming together, and the state is watching what is happening in these tiny little towns of 400 people, that are now banding together and really taking matters into their own hands in a very productive way that follows state and federal guidelines, but is very innovative. And so we're seeing these things play out, I think, in rural communities across the country. Necessity is the mother of invention.
It is,
Right?
but what makes me so mad is seeing that when the state is sitting, my point is the state will be spending for sure. It will spend $100 million on commercial district revitalization where businesses are not allowed to apply. That is insanity. They will for sure spend 172 million on multifamily rental property. That, and again, none of it is designed to come to the that 5 to 19 unit, which is exactly that sweet spot that we need. So my whole thing is, Stephen, playing on the thing that you said about the time of the missing child. I feel like I'm the mother of a missing child, which means that I will be looking for that child for the rest of my life if I have to. There is no calling it, but I would switch it to being about when's the best time to plant a tree? It was 20 years ago, but when's the second best time?
Yeah,
Today.
right. Elsie, thank you. I think that that's one of the most important takeaways for me is just making sure that if you have it as a purpose that you want small town, rural community retention, low density areas, counties, et cetera, to continue, that you have to make sure that your criteria match the intent. And I would say to this last thing that you said, Calandra, um, I don't know what level, and it probably should be at every level, at the community level, the COGs, the planning districts, the state level. There should be a resident retention or a diaspora management strategy embedded in how you do your disaster recovery management. I think that to LC, kind of piggybacking off of what LC said, that if you don't do that, um, you end up having a whole lot of perverse incentives, and the people that should be there, are having to go through the whole trauma of creating a whole new life and somewhere else completely different. And the community itself, the county itself, really loses out for doing it. This was fantastic. Thank you all so much for doing this. Really appreciate you all. And Calandra, it's great to partner with StateBook. For more information or to access the ISD help desk where you can get advice from fellows like David Dodd, Elsie Clemens, Calandra Cruikshank, um, you can visit www.isdus.org. We have our Ask the Experts help desk available 24/7. They don't answer 24/7, but it's available. And for additional information, you can email info@isdus.org. Thank you all very much, and I hope this was helpful for your purposes too.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Elsie and Stan, so much.
Thank you.